Megan Dalla Camina, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Leonie. I'm so happy to be here again. I love our
Yeah,
conversations.
no, I love it. So, for those listening, you're tuning into The Tea with Megan. This is episode 2 of our mini series. So, if you haven't tuned into episode 1, I'll drop the show. If you haven't tuned into episode 1, I'll drop the link in the show notes. Again, for those listening, let me introduce Megan before we kick off with some of our juicy questions from our audience. So, Megan is a mother, an award winning expert in women's leadership and empowerment with a notable career spanning 2 decades as a corporate executive at IBM, GE, and PwC, and over a decade as a successful entrepreneur. As the founder and CEO of Women Rising, Megan leverages her vast experience to help women achieve clarity, build confidence, and become authentic leaders. And her book, Women Rising, The Forces That Hold Us Back and the Tools to Help Us Rise, has been hailed life-changing and is a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So we are absolutely thrilled to have you on again today with us, Megan. And we're going to delve into the section 2 of your book and some of the questions that have come through from our audience. So section 2 is all about the stories that keep us stuck. So this section dives into our internal barriers, particularly those stories that we tell ourselves that keep us from rising. It focuses on the inner critic, imposter syndrome, exploring how these internal voices hold us back from achieving our full potential. Before we get into the questions, Megan, is there anything you wanted to let our listeners know about this section of the book?
This section of the book is really critical for, women. In all of the research that I've done in 20 years around women's careers, their lives, our lives as mothers, etc. The #1 self-declared issue that women say holds them back is the inner critic. It is this voice and narrative inside our heads that causes cognitive dissonance, that stops us from taking the actions that we want to take, from living the lives that we want to live, and from feeling the way that we want to feel in our lives. So this is absolutely pivotal to our experience as women. And we all have one. So for, the dads listening, you have an inner critic as well. I'm excited for the questions.
Yeah, great. And look, we did get a lot that came through. So thank you for those who did send them through. And we've sort of chosen some of the questions that we feel might be most common to most people listening from both mums and dads. So I'll kick off with question 1. So this one was from a working mum. And she said, I often feel I'm never good enough at home or at work. How can I stop these negative self-stories and embrace imperfection?
Yes. So the perfectionist is one of the archetypes of the inner critic. There's 13 archetypes that I write about in the book. And they all have consistent themes, but they also have their intricacies that we can work with in specific strategies. And the perfectionist is that has that voice of it's never good enough. Like, I just need to do it one more time. It's, it needs to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, I'm failing. So one of the strategies for the perfectionist archetype of the inner critic is we need to soften the edges of those stories and also the expectations that we place on ourselves. If we feel like we have to be perfect at work and we have to be perfect at home and we have to be the perfect mother, like, you just feel the tension in that, right? Like, you can literally never win. So looking at the expectations that you place on yourself and really starting to catch those stories. It's one of the key strategies across all of the inner critic archetypes is #1, start to catch the stories. Start to catch those moments where you are telling yourself something about the situation where it's not good enough, I'm not good enough. And what is the element of that? Is it, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to lose my job, my parents are going to, my kids are going to need therapy for the rest of their lives, because of my mothering style? What are the stories? Because then you can do the step 2, which is like, is that true? Is that story that if this presentation at work is not 100% perfect, that I'm going to lose my job? Right? Because we also, with the perfectionists, we deal in extremities. We deal in catastrophizing thinking and all or nothing thinking. And when we start to really challenge some of the stories that we tell ourselves, we realize actually that's not true. And if I did this instead, if this was 80% good enough, I'm going to be just fine. So, catching that story, asking, is that true? And then getting to the reframe. What is the action that you really want to take? And once you've done that work around stories, we lessen that cognitive dissonance, which lessens that pressure that we feel on ourselves all of the time, that nothing I do is ever going to be good enough. And we realize that there's so many achievements that we can celebrate, and those small wins every day that we can celebrate, that will start to build up that sense of self-efficacy and make you feel like you are actually doing an extraordinary job in balancing everything that you're doing.
It's so funny because this question could have come from me. I'm a recovering perfectionist, I like to say. And often, and I know the times of the day that little voice is creeping in. It's often creeping in at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The kids are ratty. I'm tired. I'm reflecting on things I've done in the day. Was that good enough? Or was that, this, that, and the other? And, you're not good enough in general. But it's funny because I'm then in the morning, I'll often journal, and I'll journal it all out. And you're talking about discovering what these stories are. For me, journaling is a way to get it out of my body and onto the page and really identify that. And so now I actually know when I hear that voice at 4 or 5 o'clock, in the afternoon, some days, I'm like, oh, there it is. Yep. Okay. Don't read into it too much, Leonie. Or if you do, we're going to journal this out tomorrow morning. So it's okay. Like there's sort of like, I feel a little bit separated from it because I'm conscious of it. So, I mean, I'm just curious from your perspective, Megan, you speak to so many people. Are we journaling? What are ways in which people can get the stories out of their bodies and they can just sort of separate from it?
Yeah, journaling's a great one. And it can be like if you've got a formal morning journaling practice and that works for you, awesome. But it could also be that you're going to just have a little notebook, and every time you hear one of those stories come up, you just write it down. Or you've got a notes app on your phone, and when you hear, oh, that's an interesting story, put it down. Because the important thing is that we're acknowledging it and that we're not just ruminating and stuck in it, which is where our stories really, like they get trapped. They get trapped in our minds, they get trapped in our bodies, and then they drive the actions that we're going to take. So I love that you do that. Any form of getting it out. I love pen on paper because it's a beautiful neurological and physiological process. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, because when this comes up for you and you're doing it in the moment, oh, there's that story again. Beautiful. Because you're acknowledging it, you're not going into it. And then the other tip is before that time comes, so it could be like 3 o'clock or 3:30, you take yourself away and do a 5-minute meditation. Or you do something fun with the kids, like watch something funny on YouTube, or you do have a dance break in the kitchen, or you go for a walk, with the kids, but you do something because okay, I'm coming into what we used to call it the witching hour. And I'm going to try and level this energy off before we get into it. So that's something else to think about. It can be really short. I used to do dance things with my son when I was in that period, and he'd jump on the couch and we'd have this dance break, and it would just like temper it off a little bit, which then also helps you and that frazzledness that we can feel. So that could help as well.
Yes. No. I love that. No, that's great. Okay, question 2. I'm a stay-at-home dad and my inner critic tells me I'm not contributing enough because I'm not bringing in income. How do I silence this voice and value the work that I do at home?
Yeah, I think it's so important that we realize that dads deal with this too. And it is literally like flipping the script. Right? And then you flip that script of what we can often feel like as mothers and stay-at-home mothers and not feel valued. And then you look at it from the dad's perspective, and then you place on top of that very human response, the gender norms and gendered expectations that dads are the breadwinners and dads go out to work and dads do this. And that loss of masculinity that stay-at-home dads can feel because they're so outside that gender construct. And we have to change all of the gender norms and constructs. So, you know, for stay-at-home dad is really breaking down and looking at, this is what I contribute. Like, write it down. These are the things. If I didn't do these things, here's the impact for my family. And because I do these things, my partner can go out and bring in the financial requirement that we need. And I'm providing, you know, these things that you're going to write down and really own and honor for yourself, and to honor and respect the role that you play, even if it is outside of what society says that men should do and the role that men should play. So it's looking at both of those things. And then all of this inner critic work is just as relevant. What are the stories? Get really clear with the stories that you're telling yourself and start to challenge them and reframe them. That will really help as well in this situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because who brings in more money can often lead to that power dynamic at home. As much as we don't really want to talk about that, and that's a bit awkward, but let's be real. Like, look at a lot of your friends and look at, you know, potentially if there's one person who's bringing the money, the other person's a lot more mindful as to sort of ensure that life is good for everyone. I don't know, like there's, you know, there's
Yeah,
definitely this power dynamic. I think
there
that
is
goes on with
power.
a lot of people. Do you see that with money? Like, talk to me about that.
100%, 100%.
Mm.
And if we look at the first part of the book that we talked about in the last episode, and patriarchy, and like so much of this is about power. And so much of power in our society to this day is, what role do you play, and the value that we as a society place on that role, and how much money do you have, and how much money do you earn. And that is the social construct, which is also gendered around power. And we bring all of that external projection into the home, and then we project it on each other. So one of the conversations that we need to have when we're in a partnership is, where are our values? What do we value in this relationship? And where do we run up against our own projections, our own limitations, our own constructs that we need to unravel together? Because so often we're not even aware of it. We bring all of that into our relationships. So yeah, power and how we define power is right at the heart of this. And where we sit in our gender and in the role that we play as part of that, which speaks to everything that dad is going through.
100%. And I'm just thinking more, even in society, think about the groups of people who want to be, or, you know, associated with certain people because of their perceived status, which is the
Status.
power, you know, that we're talking about. Like, and they might put up with more in friendships and things like that. But as long as they can be brushing shoulders with certain people, then that gives
Yeah.
them, amplifies them as a person too. I mean, we see it, as you said, outside the home. I'd love your thoughts on that too. Like, in society, what's it looking like?
Well, I mean, everything we see in society, I mean, just look at the power lists that we see. And I write about this in the book, of my experience back when I was like 34 and a new executive at IBM, and at a women's conference, and this male editor standing up talking about the latest power list. And I stood up and I said, well, number one, where are the women? And number two, how are you defining power? And to this day, you look at any of those lists, those power lists that come out, what is it about? Status, money. Still, to this day, in this year that we are living in, we see it in politics, we see it in government, we see it in organizations, we see it with the Kardashians. Everywhere we look, status, money, power, and beauty, by the way. And one of the inner critic archetypes is the beauty queen. So, like, we have to be really conscious to this. Because when we're conscious to it, it hits differently. Because we see it, we can detach ourselves from it. We don't embody it, and then we can have that discussion in our relationships. You know, like the dad, I'm really struggling because I'm at home when gender norms say I should be out there, and I don't have the power that men have in society. Like, how do I deal with that? That's the core question. What's
Yeah.
my value here in this role? And when the partner really understands that, I didn't know that's the struggle. What do I think about that? How do we reconcile that in our home and step back from what we see out there around power, status, money, etc.?
Mm.
It changes everything. But so often we're just not conscious to it. We're not, and we're certainly
Yes.
not having the conversations about it.
Yes, 100%. And I want to touch on beauty there. And I'm going to speak to an experience that I had more recently with a group of mums. Now, beauty is a very complex one, right? Particularly social media probably doesn't help that. And a lot of the mums were saying, not a lot, a number of the mums were saying, I'm struggling to move my pregnancy weight. I don't feel sexy in my own body. I look on Instagram and I see the fabulosity of we're talking about powerful, the mums, the wags, these, influencer, whatever, some, because there's a lot of beautiful, there's a lot of influencers out there too that are really proud in showing their messy bits. But then there's a lot that want to show that perfection as well. And they're like, so I'm comparing myself to people like that and going, I'm not good enough. And so therefore I'm bringing that into the home, and I haven't had sex with my partner for 6 months. Why? Because I don't feel good in my body, myself. I'm getting validation from externally that I'm not good enough. And so that's the story that they're telling themselves. I'd love your thoughts on this beauty aspect.
Oh, look, this is so hard, right? So let's just acknowledge how pervasive and intrusive and derailing this is, because I don't want to gloss over it, right? And which you haven't done as well. And I'm so pleased you brought this in. And when we talk about the inner critic, it kind of brings together two archetypes. One is the beauty queen, where we place so much value and our own self-worth based on how we look, whatever age and stage that we're at, and particularly after pregnancy. Like, it's primal, right? Cuts so deep. And also the comparer, which is the inner critic archetype that constantly is looking, who's doing what, how do I judge myself and my success based on what I see other people doing. So this is very real. It's very hard. And here's a couple of things that I would recommend. Number one, like, social media is right. It's right at the toxic center of this, and the amplification of that comparison and of what we see, and everybody's perfect picture of, oh, look how good my body looks 2 weeks after I've had my baby. It's such complete bullshit, right? And starting to unfollow and detach from anything that makes you feel less than who you are. And we say that, but we don't do it, right? So we stay in this vortex of feeling like shit all of the time, but we're scrolling, we're looking, we're scrolling, we're looking, we feel like crap, we keep going. So we have to break that cycle, number one. Number two, owning the season that we're in and what that means, and owning our womanhood and everything that does to our bodies. Again, whether you are post-pregnant, whether you're pregnant, post-pregnancy. I went through it when I was pregnant because I was so skinny before I got pregnant, and then I was huge. Everyone was like, oh my God, are you having twins? Are you having triplets? I was massive. And like, that hit me really hard when I was pregnant. So that you can just honor yourself and the stage of the journey that you are at, and start to get some detachment from what you are seeing out there to what's actually going on for you, and surrounding yourself with people who support that, whether it's your mother's group, your partner, your girlfriends, and having those safe spaces where you can say, I feel really, really crap about myself right now, and have positive mirrors and positive reflections, rather than just this perfection, this fake perfection that we see on television, social media, magazines, etc. Does that help?
Yeah.
Like, does that even start to get to
Definitely.
very
I think you've
complex?
got to very complex, and you really do have to curate what you're bringing in, as you said, just being as deliberate as possible. But
Yes.
what I think is so hilarious about what you said, and it's so true, that we know that we shouldn't follow some people and they don't make us feel good
Still
about
do it.
ourselves, but we follow them anyway. Like, what's
Yeah,
up with
and
that?
like
That's so messed up.
what is up with that? Right. And this is again like tuning into the stories, tuning into your own stories and your own narratives. Like what need for you is being fulfilled by looking at that. Sometimes it's motivation and inspiration.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is self-flagellation. And we're just like, oh, see, you're just so crap because you don't look like that. And I also love the tool of feeding yourself, just like we can curate our social media feed, we can also curate our stories. So, you know, all throughout the book, I have affirmations. For every archetype, there are affirmations. And that, you know, when you're hearing that negative story come up, you may not have time to sit down and write down the story and is that true, but you can certainly have a positive affirmation on standby that when you hear this, you replace it with this. Yeah, when you hear the story of, oh, your body, you should be a size 6 by now. I am beautiful and I'm doing the best that I can. Right? Like, how do you pre-program and reprogram those inner critic narratives whilst you're also, you know, doing some of that deeper work?
Yeah, absolutely love it. So, for those of you who are interested in the book Women Rising, I'm going to pop the link to the book in the show notes. Megan, any final words on this really complex topic around the stories that hold us back?
It is complex, but it is also simple. So we don't need to get overwhelmed with the inner critic. We need to do 3 things. Number 1, catch the stories you're telling yourself. Ask, is that true? Challenge those stories and then reframe the story into something that's going to be empowering and help you create the narrative and the confidence that you want to have within yourself. So we can really break it down to its smallest denominator, which is that start to be more conscious and start to be more kind and self-compassionate about how you are moving through the world.
Yeah, love that. Well, thank you so much, Megan, for your time. We'll catch you next time.
See you soon.